Hello and welcome to this talk brought to you by Golden Jubilee's new multicultural group. My name is Abu Zar Aziz and I'm based in the performance and planning team as the head of programs, and I'll be hosting today. I'll introduce our guest speaker shortly, but there's a few housekeeping items I'd like to discuss with you. So Dr. Nazim's given up his time here, so please keep your microphone on mute, please, and turn your video off for the duration of the talk. And this will kind of help keep any tech problems at bay. Teams supports live captioning, which you can find under the More options, the ... menu at the top. So Dr. Ghouri will take some questions at the end of the talk, but if you have any questions throughout, please write them in the chat and we'll get to them after the talk. He's also agreed to share his slides so you can revisit them in your own time. If you're interested in getting involved with the multicultural group, please send an email to Bren or Rob or myself for further information. So Dr. Nazim Ghouri graduated from University of Edinburgh in around 2004. He commenced his specialty registrar training in diabetes endocrinology and general medicine in 2008 and was appointed consultant since the summer of 2015 at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital here in Glasgow. He's also the chair for the Quality of Access Diabetes MCN subgroup for Greater Glasgow and Clyde. And he's got ongoing research projects in his speciality as well as a field of ethnicity and religion in health and disease, particularly in relation to the South Asians and Muslims. His research interests include relating to this speciality as well as general medicine and health, with particular focus on ethnicity, inequality and religious aspects, particularly fasting in Ramadan and ethics, having published novel papers and spoken nationally in this particular area. He's approximately 40 publications in high impact journals such as BMG and Diabetes Care, Hepatology and Diabetology, if I pronounced that right, Nazim. He's also written a book, he's written a chapter in a book in Health Technology Assessment Report for the NIHR on insulin sensitizers and on non-alcohol like fatty liver disease. Finally, he's one of the originators and main editors of the British Islamic Medical Association Ramadan Comprehensive Information Guidance on the Management of Patients during Ramadan for HCPs, covering a range of specialities. So I'll let Nazim continue his presentation. Thanks, Nazim.
Okay, thanks, Abu, for that. So today's presentation is a general kind of overview and introduction to Ramadan for people who are less familiar with the concept. Now, this is not the type of talk that I would give. So normally when I give this type of talk, I give it to healthcare professionals when it comes to how to manage patients. This is more an informative, interactive, informal presentation. So I'll just share my slides and get going. So I take it you can see my presentation now?
Loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. So Abu's introduced me. So by and large, I've got a research interest and a clinical interest in Ramadan, amongst other things. Hence Abu had asked me to do this presentation. I'm based at the Queen Elizabeth and Gartnavel University, and diabetes endocrinology is my base specialty. And diabetes lends itself to Ramadan just because of the nature of the condition and the fact that it affects so many people. And I'll touch upon some stats later on. So today we're just going to cover some basics. What does Ramadan actually mean? What is it and why? What it means to a Muslim who's exempt, so not everybody fasts. Your body when feeding and fasting, so what happens to your body when in relation to energy, to help understand what happens from a physiological perspective, which I think is quite interesting and important, particularly with so many diets out there, the 16 and 8, the 5+2, the water diet, all these other diets. So it's important just to have a good background from a general perspective, and a bit in terms of what it means to Muslim staff in NHS from a kind of practical perspective, particularly for colleagues of such staff. So, I mean, in terms of like the Islamic legal definition of it, it's one of the 5 religious pillars. So it's not just 5 obligations that we have in our faith, but there's 5 main pillars. One of which is faith, the other is prayer, giving the obligatory charity, fasting, and the pilgrimage. But there's more obligations that extend beyond this, but these are the 5 that people often refer to. So Ramadan or fasting is the 4th of those pillars, and it involves abstinence of food and drink and marital relations from dawn to dusk from a lunar month. And it starts from the start of the morning prayer, which at this time is round about, say, 3 o'clock. Slight subtle variation in timetables because of how they calculate the start of the day, because it's summer, it's a bit arbitrary. And sunset round about 10 past, 9:15 at this point in time. It was shorter at the start of the month, but round about 22, 23 days in. It was round about kind of closer to 16 and a half, 17 hours. We're now well over 18 hours of fasting. And generally, it's obligatory if someone's attained age of puberty, is sane and physically capable. So you have to tick those boxes for it to be obligatory upon you. A bit of a glossary to get people going, just because I'll be using these terms. Sahoor is the pre-dawn dawn meal or the food consumed before the fast starts. The iftar is a meal or food consumed when opening the fast at sunset. Sharia is the term used when we talk about the religious or sacred Islamic law. It's not to do with various extreme fatwa or religious edicts. It's a general term used when we're talking about sacred law. So what does it actually mean to the general Muslim fast? All the stuff I mentioned before, but it's an important time of year when an extra effort is made in one's religious and spiritual pursuits. And also, importantly, it's a time when family and community come together. It's a very social month as well. Now, with the pandemic, particularly last year and to a lesser degree this year, that is significantly curtailed because health comes first. So, for example, the concept of getting together in people's houses and eating and sharing food and things like that, if one were following the rules religiously in terms of social distancing, social contact, it's by and large it's been a virtual form. But certainly when it comes to opening the fast, it's common custom to try and gather together with people every so often, particularly neighbours, friends, loved ones, to open a fast. And generally what people are doing, because of the restrictions of the pandemic, are that people are sending food to each other so that at least they can partake in a sharing of food, even though they can't sit together and eat. And then historically as well, or even contemporary, there's extra night prayers, which are voluntary after the night prayer. So the fourth prayer is when people open the fast, and the fifth prayer is a late night prayer. And after that, there's an extra voluntary prayer that people pray, which can be anything up to 45 minutes, an extra hour and a half of worship. And generally, ladies, children, everybody would come to that. And even if it would be late, anytime after 10:30, 10:45, even well beyond midnight, children might actually come at weekends or on holidays to participate, by and large to see their friends, but also to be part of that community spirit. Now with mosques limited in terms of how people can be admitted, depending on the mosque, the setup, people have to register in advance, some allowing people to come for a number of nights and giving other people a chance on other nights. There's lots of practical considerations now because of the limited numbers. So, for example, my local mosque in Bearsden generally could accommodate over up to 150, even slightly more. But because of the rules, only 50 or so are allowed in because of social distancing. So with that, people have been coming for like spells of 10 nights at a time, so that it could, in the interest of fairness, and people register. And likewise, when it comes to the prayer at the end of Ramadan, on the day of celebration, the Eid celebration, again, there's extra prayers, and people would sign up onto one of the standings, if you like, for that. In terms of the actual fast itself, I've alluded to the fact that at the moment it's around over 18 hours, but if you go back a couple of years when Ramadan fasts were the longest in the UK, it was typically well over 18 hours across the UK. In 2021 for Glasgow, it's got 16 and a half to 18 and a half hours, and the days are getting longer through the month. And there's a website there if people want to get, if they're a bit curious or keen to see what the length of fasts are throughout the world. But generally in temperate regions, in summertime they're long, in wintertime they're short. Equatorial regions, little change throughout the year, by and large tending to be around 14 hours or so. But in temperate regions can be anywhere literally from 10 to 20 hours. The closer you get to the poles, the longer and greater the extremities. Just to give an example, over the next 5 years in some of the bigger cities, and Muslim populous cities in the UK, in 2024, probably around about 16 hours or more, and Glasgow, Edinburgh being a bit further north, slightly longer average fasting time. Is it a big issue? Is it worth knowing about, particularly for people living in the west of Scotland or in the UK? Well, there's about 2.7 million people in England and Wales that were class themselves as Muslim based on the consensus data from 2011, and 12.8% in London, so that's 1 in 8. And in Glasgow, 5.4%. So the most populous city in Scotland with the largest proportion of Muslims living in it. So about 1 in 20 will class themselves as Muslim. The majority of our South Asian, so largely Pakistani and Bangladeshi, but also some Indians, like myself and Abu, for example, background, and there are others from an Arab background, accounting for about a third of the population overall. The important thing is that people who are of a South Asian and Arab extraction have an increased prevalence of diabetes. When I talk about prevalence of a disease, it's how common or how familiar it is in the kind of community or in society. So generally, what we say is that it's about 5%. Diabetes prevalence is 5%. So 1 in 20 people have diabetes. In the Asian community, that might actually be 1 in 5 people. So 20% or so might have diabetes. So it's important to be aware of that, because people with diabetes, many of them have complications, and fasting can be challenging, particularly if they're on medications such as insulin, which can cause low blood sugars. And therefore, from my own clinical perspective, it's of relevance. And we also know, for example, that when it comes to South Asians in general, diabetes care and control, they have poorer control and they experience poorer outcomes. So it's an important backdrop to be aware of, particularly when it comes to Ramadan, in terms of people may wish to be fasting, but their health might not be in the best of nick at a starting point. And we know that fasting is something that people do take seriously within the faith, because over 90% of Muslims will generally fast for some or all of the month. But as I mentioned early on, people are exempt from fasting either because of permanent or temporary factors. And the ruling comes from one of the verses in one of the chapters of the Holy Quran, the Muslim Holy Book. And the main thing is in bold: but whoever among you is sick or on a journey, then he shall fast a like number of other days, and those who are not able to do it, effect a redemption by feeding a poor man, and God desires ease for you. So basically, if a person can't fast or is not in a state of fast, and it also applies to, for example, menstruating and women in the postnatal period, and breastfeeding and pregnancy, depending on circumstances, they would make up the fasts at another time. Hence, in a country like the UK, when the winter has shorter fasts, it's an ample and easy opportunity to make up fasts. If they aren't able even to fast in the winter, even if it's intermittently, then they would feed a poor person for every day they can't fast, and this usually would be determined after they've exhausted all other means. And again, just to kind of explain that in more detail, so the classic example from a doctor's perspective, if you're looking at things, is when there's an illness. So if it's an acute illness, like an infection, or there's been like a fracture, injury, we have to take painkillers, or they've got a condition, a chronic medical condition or ailment, where fasting, say for example in summer, might be impractical, so they need to take tablets 2 or 3 times a day. So although they're not unwell, but if they don't take the medication, they will become unwell. Then they would be then fasting for another time of year when it's easier, might be able to do so. If that exemption is indefinite, that's again when it will be replaced by feeding a poor person to make up for the obligation that can't be fulfilled in the literal form. So how do we determine sickness? Is something important to be aware of, because sometimes even Muslims get this wrong, and as a doctor I have first-hand experience of dealing with this. So the main thing when we consider someone to be unwell or a sickness from fasting, if you like, would be an ailment that worsens through fasting, especially if it causes irreversible damage or significant impairment. And old age and frailty would fall into this, if appropriate. An ailment that the healing of which is delayed by fasting. So for example, if somebody is on antibiotics for a skin infection and they're taking a medication like flucloxacillin 4 times a day, and it's the only appropriate medication for them, fasting would actually probably cause delay in healing or potentially further disability or pain, because you do only have a limited window to take the medication. So fasting would be it'd be desirable not to fast, complete your antibiotics, get better, and either complete whatever fast you can or make up the fast. Or there's a legitimate fear of either of the above happening. So a legitimate fear means like there's a genuine reason or concern that this could happen, and that's determined. Generally, those definitions of sickness are determined by the 3 statements at the bottom of the slide, which are prior experience of fasting, where with that ailment to know what happens. Common knowledge. So for example, as an endocrinologist, we have patients who have Addison's disease, or a condition where your adrenal glands don't make enough steroids. Generally, steroids are taken 2 or 3 times a day to replace what the body can't make. With long fasts, that would actually be not practical or safe or suitable. So in that scenario, fasting, particularly in the summer, would be a no-go area. We actually have written a guidance paper for the Society for Endocrinology, which is commissioned. There is some evidence to show that switching the type of steroid onto once daily steroids would allow safe fasting, provided all things are safe otherwise. And that's an example of how one can address issues by delving into the science of medicine a bit deeper, to look at evidence, look at studies, look at first principles to try and make things easier. And likewise, if the viewpoint of an opinion or opinion of a qualified Muslim physician on the matter, and I put Muslim in brackets because historically that's what the books of jurisprudence make reference to, but living in a country where we have like a GMC, you have regulation, we have access to guidance like papers that we have written, then even a non-Muslim giving guidance to non-Muslim would be considered valid because it's based on evidence or something. I'm sorry, my son is throwing a tantrum downstairs. So just to dispel some myths in terms of what people might consider to be allowed or not allowed when fasting, I'm going to give a few questions and I want to see if you've been paying attention. So Abu, maybe you can keep an eye in terms of hands going up in the room and feedback to me or someone else. Can a person take subcutaneous insulin while fasting? Now, this is a bit tricky, but I've mentioned what has to be abstained from. So how many people think that taking an insulin injection under the skin would be acceptable or allowed whilst fasting?
We've got one hand so far, two.
Okay, so the answer is yes, you can. Taking insulin does not break or terminate the fast. And there's a paper which goes things more detail in the BMJ from about 17 years ago. A person can't break their fast if they become unwell. So what I'm looking for are hands up for yes, they can't break their fast if they become unwell. Pay attention to the wording.
So we have one hand.
Okay. No, it was a double negative there, was there to confuse people. If you're more than entitled to break your fast if you're unwell, and you'd be encouraged to do so because causing harm should always be alleviated. Pregnant and nursing mothers have to fast.
No hands.
No, and that's correct. Not if they're a risk to mother and or baby, and that comes back to the 3 criteria we talked about earlier. So now coming back to the normal body. So we've talked a bit about Ramadan. So next part of the presentation is to really understand from a general perspective in terms of energy requirements for the body, food, how the body breaks down food, what happens in fasting state. And this is just a general thing applicable to anybody and everybody. So generally we say that the energy requirements are 2,000 to 2,500 calories for a man, 1,500 to 2,000 calories for a lady, and they're very dependent on lifestyle and health. An athlete training at their peak might be requiring 4,000. Somebody who's on a very strict diet because they're trying to lose weight might be on something around 1,000 or even less. Now, just to help understand energy, calories and joules. So 4 calories. Actually, I won't go to that. I'll just confuse everybody. I'll just keep that quiet. Important thing is to understand fat, carbohydrate, and protein are 3 sources of energy, and they're not equal in terms of the energy they give. So 1 gram of fat will give you 9 calories. 1 gram of carbohydrate will give you around 4 calories, and 1 gram of protein will give you 4 calories. So if I were to give you a kilo of butter, a kilo of flour, and a kilo of chicken, the kilo of butter would have more than double the amount of calories compared to the flour and the chicken. I haven't put alcohol there for obvious reasons, because this is a general Ramadan presentation, Muslims don't drink, but if one were to be interested in alcohol gives around 7 or 8 calories per gram. So again, very energy dense. Hence, the concept of a beer belly is very real. And And generally, all unused energy ultimately will get converted to and stored as fat in healthy people. And that's usually under the influence of insulin when it comes to glucose metabolism. That's a talk for another day. Fruit and veg is also good for you, but remember they also have calories too. Now, I'm not telling people not to eat fruit and veg, but it's because particularly people take, for example, fruit juice and these types of things. They're good for you, but it's important to understand the calorific content with that, and I'll touch upon this later. In terms of how we should break things down, there's lots of subtle variations, but generally I say about half your calories should be in the form of carbohydrate, and the remaining half should be split equally between protein and fat. That just keeps it very simple. Depending on your own specific diets, it will vary, but that's just a good ballpark to keep in mind. In terms of the normal body, continued, fluid is lost in the form of urine, feces, sweat, and by breathing. Most is obviously lost through urine. Generally, we say when someone's healthy, if they're passing around about 1 milliliter per kilogram per minute of urine a day. So if somebody is around 70 kilos in body weight, that's about 1.5 liters of urine being passed a day. But generally, there'll be variation depending on people's habits and things, but usually we expect people to pass over 1 liter of urine a day. The amount lost through other means is really negligible. Nonetheless, it's worth being aware of, particularly when it comes to sweating and you're in a hot, unaccustomed climate. So for example, if somebody has, say, with the pandemic, had gone, for example, to the pilgrimage in Mecca or Medina in Saudi Arabia around Ramadan time, it's summertime, they'll be very hot. They could potentially lose easily half to an extra liter of fluid just from sweating alone until their body adjusts. So it's easy to lose 2.5 liters from all of the above. And the normal source of fluid is from drink, food, and from utilization of energy sources. So roughly, again, majority, the same way that you lose majority through urine, the majority of fluid comes in through drinking. And salt is a devil. So if you're taking more than 5-6 grams of salt a day, then what you'll actually find is that you'll actually make you more thirsty, and what will happen is they'll drink more than they need and actually cause more toileting. So salt's important, but hence when it comes to people who are on blood pressure medication, one way to help keep blood pressure under control is to lose a bit of salt, because that loses some fluid and helps control blood pressure in simple terms. To kind of picture it, if you were looking at things from a weight perspective, if the energy you're consuming equals the energy you're expending, then there is going to be no change in weight. That's regardless if you're thin, normal weight, or overweight. Bottom line is if input equals output, you will stay where you are. If you want to gain, then you need to tip more things in energy intake relative to the expenditure. And if you want to lose, you tip things more expenditure relative to the intake. And the important thing when it comes to energy expenditure, there's 3 main ways. One is through physical activity, one through your basal metabolic rate. So every cell is kind of generating energy. It's called it's a basal rate, even if you're doing nothing. And then there's the thermic effect of food. So when one eats, they can give off heat sometimes. So sometimes, I don't know if you come across meat sweats and things like that as an example. There's a couple of other useful physiological facts. Small changes in fluid balance can have detrimental effects. So for example, saltiness in your blood changing by 1% can drive thirst, but you need a 5 to 10% reduction in blood or fluid in the body to drive thirst. So basically, salt can affect your thirst much more quicker and much more sensitively than the loss of volume. Hunger doesn't always mean a need for energy. Some foods take longer to break down than others. So a bowl of Frosties versus a bowl of porridge. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that you could have the same amount of energy from both, but because the porridge takes a bit longer to break down, it stays in your stomach for a bit longer. So the signals sent to your brain to cause you to start eating again, your satiety center will be less. If, for example, you eat something that gets broken down quickly, like Frosties, then although you've got the energy, your stomach is empty, so it'll start sending signals to fill up again. So just filling up of the stomach doesn't always equate to energy, and we know that, for example, in patients who are overweight. In terms of what happens, in terms of how we utilize energy when we're normal eating every 4 to 6 hours, like we're eating 2 or 3 times a day at regular intervals. This diagram is taken from a paper which I had written with some colleagues to do with a review of the management of patients in Ramadan. This was from last year. Generally, what happens is we consume food. excuse me. When we consume food, as I said, there's three main sources: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. When we consume carbohydrate, the food gets ultimately converted into glucose. And what happens is the glucose then causes a number of different pathways to be affected in the body. The main one to be interested in is to do with the pancreas, and that releases insulin. Insulin is what's required for the glucose to be utilized. So for it to be taken up by fat and muscle cells, we need insulin to act as a key to take it in. The brain can access glucose without that key. The liver can access glucose without that key as well. What happens in the liver is that glucose is restored as starch. In the muscles, it's stored as starch and utilized in real time, and fat is taken up and converted into fat, to keep it simple. And that's what happens generally in a 4 to 6 hour cycle. So there's little need for things to break down because you're able to utilize what you've consumed. If, however, you're consuming very little, or you're going for prolonged periods without eating, and I think the main thing is to really focus on the 12 to 30, the kind of 12 to 36 hour period, is that what happens is your insulin levels go down, your glucagon levels, which does the opposite of insulin, go up. This causes the liver to secrete the glucose stored as starch, so it breaks down and gets released into the blood. Likewise, the muscles will utilize the glucose from that source, as there's nothing coming from the food. Low insulin levels reduce drive for muscle glycogen and synthesis glycogen storage deplete. So basically, whatever glucose stores that you have in the form of starch, so glycogen is the body form of starch, if you like. That basically gets broken down. Now, as things progress beyond 12 hours, 24 hours, that's when the fat starts breaking down to release fatty acids. The fatty acids are converted into something called ketones for the brain to use, because they can't use fatty acids, and the muscles can make use of fatty acids. And some of the benefits of the metabolic switch of breaking down fat are listed there. So one way to induce that quicker is to eat very little consume very little carbohydrate or food, so that you basically induce this kind of breakdown of fat at an earlier level. Now, people say you are what you eat, and for many people, many cultures, many customs, food and diet have a key social element to things, and have a key part in terms of how people engage and interact with each other. A lot of these foods that you see are very yummy, to be frank. Many of these foods, fortunately or unfortunately, are fried. And often what happens with these types of foods are that they come in large quantities, or as in the case in the top left slide, yes, that is actually the number of people sitting around a dish. There's no limit to what one can eat. You basically eat till you stop. And the important thing I'm highlighting with this is that when it comes to food, some foods can be more energy dense than others. Now, I want to highlight here, for example, things, for example, rice. And what we're doing is we're using a number of teaspoons or cubes of sugar to give an equivalent to compare energy across the board. So a medium chapati and 4 tablespoons of cooked rice are broadly similar, 6 or 7 spoons of sugar worth of energy. But the thing I want to highlight are the last two. So the carton of juice, which I think is at 200 ml, the can of Coke, which is 330 ml. So the can of the carton of juice has 5 spoons of sugar. The can of Coke has 8 teaspoons of sugar. Now, if one were to do the math and multiply up the 200 to 330, actually what you're finding is there's very little difference per 100 ml in terms of amount of sugar for fruit juice and for Coca-Cola. And this is the full-fat Coca-Cola. This is not your half-fat iron brew because of the government regulations. And the reason I know this well is that as a diabetologist, we have to give our patients who are on insulin advice on how to manage a hypoglycemic episode or a low blood sugar if the sugar is, say, 3.5, less than 3.5 or 4. Now, what that means is that they have to take a set quantity of fruit juice or Coca-Cola to bring the sugars up. Now, when the sugar tax came into play, Lucozade, Iron Brew, and many other companies halved the amount of sugar content, which meant that they had to double the amount you had to take of these juices to get the same amount of sugar. Consequently, we don't use them or advise people to use them because it's something that can be very unpalatable to drink a lot of fluid when you're not feeling well. But pretty much orange juice and Coca-Cola have the same amount of sugar. So whenever someone thinks fruit juice is good for you, remember from an energy or sugar point of view, it's actually got the same amount as a can of Coke, full fat Coke. Yes, it may have vitamins and things, but just remember, if someone is wondering why their weight's going up and they think they're, in inverted commas, having a healthy diet, but the reality is they're having 2-3 cartons of juice or glasses of juice, it's because of all the empty calories you're getting from the juice. If one were to, for example, eat an apple, they'd probably feel more full and get maybe half the energy they'd get by drinking a carton of apple juice, for example. The sahoor, or the food before keeping breakfast, just to give an example how we can get energy from different sources, 100 grams of carbs in that breakfast, which very much looks like a typical hospital breakfast almost. There's a bowl of cereal, there's some toast, there'll be some coffee or tea with milk, there'll be jam, there'll be a glass of some juice there. And there you go, juice, jam, toast, milk, cereal. Now, an alternative sahoor, which has, say, eggs and has a bit more fruit, for example, the amount of energy coming from carbohydrates is only 40 grams, but it's still quite a wholesome meal. So this is important to understand when someone, for example, was trying to cut back on carbohydrate, but doesn't want to feel hungry. Mixing the food up is important, because some foods can make you feel more full. And again, here, a good mixture of things, something probably more related to what we call a continental breakfast. Now, for the NHS, whether it's for a trust that serves for NHS Scotland, for the Golden Jubilee Hospital, or for Greater Glasgow and Clyde, or whatever it may be, it's important to understand that certainly from a patient perspective, and probably by extension even from an employee perspective, and for employers, that fasting and prayer don't concern the doctors. They don't even know what it is. Communication, decision making, and perceived social relations of Pakistani Muslim patients with long-term illnesses. So there's a general skepticism held by patients about how they think their doctor or the healthcare practitioner perceives Muslim patients or understanding of their faith. And another quote is that practitioners and patients are typically unwilling to engage in discussion about religious influences on patient decision-making, reflecting a patient's lack of confidence in the appropriateness of raising such issues, and a professional's lack of awareness of their importance. So having sessions like this raises awareness and also gives confidence. And although this is talking about a patient, doctor-patient interaction, it's probably applicable to even a colleague with colleague interaction. So some points that I have put down, which I've learned from experience, time, and from the various hats and roles and capacities I've been in and worn, are that Ramadan is just once a year. The length of fast also varies, so it's not always an issue. Ramadan shouldn't be seen as, Muslim, what's this issue with the fasting? In the winter time, it's a non-issue. But the point is to be aware of that for some patients, particularly if they, say, for example, have diabetes or other conditions, that they may have to adapt or adjust for a month or for a period of time. And therefore, staff and management need to be proactive in knowing the facts and be sensitive to an individual's requirements during the month. And importantly, each person's requirements are going to be different. Some may have no requirements. So for example, if someone like myself is generally healthy, the requirements might be very little or zero. Muslim staff want understanding and practical support. They aren't looking for a holiday. They're not looking to be treated as somebody with special needs. They're wanting to be understood. So and where they can be accommodated in a practical sense, that's what they're really looking for. And again, if you don't know, ask. Don't assume anything. If you assume, that's often the worst recipe for disaster. And just to be honest about things, we'd rather have someone who's honest and ask questions rather than someone making assumptions which might be stigmatized and actually be somewhat bordering on prejudicial. There are many quick wins. For example, if you are trying to help employees or colleagues who are Muslim, particularly at this time of year when the fasts are long and one has to wake up in the middle of the night to have the pre-dawn meal. So a slight alteration in working hours and patterns may be all that's needed. So for example, just starting the day at, say, 10 o'clock rather than 8:30 or 9 and finishing, say, 6 o'clock might make things easier for all parties concerned. And often as well, that's the reason for that's not so much the hunger, it's just the sleep. Getting a stretch of sleep from, say, maybe 3:30 to 8:30 or something, of 5 hours might be something that will allow them to be fresh for the rest of the day. They can have a nap afterwards or before they wake up. But the point is, again, that stretch of sleep can be important for many individuals. And again, I think the most important thing is moving forward, given that Ramadan is a perpetual and permanent fixture in the calendar, we don't want to make it wait for the months to start or end to make a start in doing something. The dates and by extension information can be known well in advance. We have chaplains and most importantly friendly colleagues who are willing to help and signpost and engage and educate. the end. Hopefully that wasn't too much factual overload, but quite interesting and enlightening from a practical perspective.
Thank you, Nazim. You can take questions by just raising your hand, or you can enter questions into the box on the right-hand side.
So a few hands up, so just shout out.
Brinley.
So you showed the slide earlier on with the particularly high calorie content of fatty food and of protein relative to the high calorie content of fatty food relative to carbohydrates, which sort of indicates that if you're looking to pack calories into a short time, eating fatty and protein-rich foods might serve you better than carbohydrate. Sounds very similar to diets like keto diets, which allow people to fast for a long time. Is there, like, historically a lot of sort of ketonic diets in Muslim cultures?
So generally, I mean, I always use the analogy when someone wants to understand frying, I explain to them the concept of boiling. So when you have raw rice and you cook rice, you boil the rice by and large, the rice gets bigger. It's because it absorbs water. Now, if you fry something, you're boiling in oil. So that's why, for example, if you were to take, for example, because we're in Scotland, we love to deep fry everything. Your Mars bar, you deep fry it. Forget the batter and everything. You're absorbing all the calories from the oil as well. So you're getting more, the energy density goes up. So this concept of energy density is very important. And you're right, you might be fasting for 18 hours, but you could be feasting potentially for 6 hours, and you could mitigate all the desirable effects one is trying to acquire from fasting in terms of either trying to lose weight or to be disciplined with their eating. So they say you are what you eat, and this is why we kind of have this. When it comes to specific keto diets and things and the faith itself, there's nothing specific there. But historically, if you're to look at the practice and the pattern of eating habits, even from a cultural perspective, from many of from the Middle East or India or whatever it is, the concept of eating 3 times a day is a relatively new thing. By and large, most people ate twice a day, morning and night. And even people here in Scotland, if you look at hunter-gatherer approach to things, they might have even gone maybe a day without eating. So the concept of eating 3 times a day or eating regularly is a very modern thing. So by and large, even if you look at the 16 and 8 diet, for example, 16 hours of fasting, only 8 hours of eating, only an 8-hour window of eating. The whole concept of all these diets are that you're trying to have this period where you're not eating anything. The idea is that although you might eat in a certain windows, what happens is people get more used to being hungry, so the need to eat or the feeling to eat might be less. The stomachs might shrink in size, so to fill themselves, there's a lot of benefits with things. And also, interestingly, when you look at the 16 and 8 diet, although you might eat the same amount of food or have the same amount of energy intake as a normal diet, the metabolic benefits are still better by having that period of fasting. So culturally, historically, there probably was an inadvertent practice of such diets, but now because of modern life and access to food, high-calorie food, we perhaps have to go back to try and formally do something to try and get back to the healthier way, particularly when it comes to body mass and things.
Thank you very much.
Rob, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to thank you. I thought that was really, really interesting presentation, full of, packed full of facts, and I certainly learned a lot, from attending today's session. Particularly interested around reasonable adjustments that organisations can put in place for staff during the month of Ramadan fasting. So I found that particularly useful, and I'm definitely going to take that forward. Brennan and I can maybe introduce that into policy, etc., or provide guidance notes. So that was certainly really useful. Just a sort of general question about fasting. Do you notice sort of during the month of Ramadan that there is weight loss, following the period of fasting, or is that just a question?
It very much depends on each individual in terms of what they're doing. Sometimes subconsciously or even consciously, people will do less during their fasting periods. And that mitigates sometimes the reduced eating. So for example, you're only eating 2 meals instead of 3, but you might do the activity that only requires the energy from 2 meals, not 3. So a lot of it boils down to what an individual is doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's in terms of regular exercise, walking, working from home. Now, obviously with the pandemic, most people are working from home. So generally, and I'm finding this in my diabetes clinic, all my patients' weights have gone up. So there's that general thing anyway, that when you're doing less, these things happen. So all the more reason that when it comes to the time of eating, one is sensible in how much and what they eat. Because I mentioned as well, people aren't inviting each other around or sending food around. I've said to my wife that, fasting in Ramadan does mitigate, there's no concept of being able to control what you eat. We have so much food sent and you don't want to waste food that although we're not cooking much, we're trying to get through all the food people are sending us. So I keep voluntary fasts throughout the year as well. And I said to her, look, ironically, we'll probably get more metabolic benefit from the voluntary fast than in this month, because you don't want to hurt people's feelings by not accepting food or saying no, or equally wasting food. And the whole purpose is to try and appreciate what we have. So it is difficult, but I think part of it also depends what type of food you're sending people around. So in terms of the weight loss question, it's variable. Certainly in the summer and the peak of it, generally people, if you are going to lose weight, you will lose some weight because there's only so much you can eat in 4 hours. But as the days get shorter and get to winter, then the opposite can be true, because that psychological thing, oh, I've been fasting. But if you break it down, no, you've only not been eating for 10 hours, which is not much. It's like going to bed at 10 o'clock, waking up at 8 in the morning and whatever. So a lot of it's mindset. And I think as well that historically people might say, oh, you've been fasting to relax, don't do whatever. But there's actually guidance there. There's Zafar Iqbal, who is the doctor, he used to be the Tottenham club doctor, who's now the Crystal Palace club doctor, who's done some stuff on guidance on exercise and fasting, the best times to exercise, types of exercise to do. And the general feeling is that one can be sensitive. If they're used to exercising out with Ramadan, they should be able to exercise to a degree within. And the timing of it, particularly, for example, just before opening the fast, or maybe a couple of hours after opening the fast, and they're probably the best 2 times to exercise from a safety perspective, from a hydration point of view. But you certainly wouldn't use an 18-hour fasting month as a time to start doing new exercise, particularly if you're unfit or unhealthy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just following up on that, Rob, is certainly with lockdown, you notice that the weight loss is not as significant as previous years. Before you'd walk 3 kilometers a day. That means like going to school, dropping off the kids, going to the train station, going into the office, coming back, things like that. So that takes a lot of calories and use of calories. But now if you're coming into the office once a week or in a blended fashion, has an impact. And also, I become more sedentary during Ramadan. You're not playing your 5-a-side football, or you're doing that exercise, whatever, during with Ramadan. So you're more likely to go on more walks, for example, rather going to the gym or doing any kind of weight training or any kind of physical or kind of activity that requires expenditure a lot of energy. So it really depends on what your intake of food is going to be. Yeah, and in some cultures, you have a feast every night, which just defeats the purpose of actually fasting. You spend the whole day just preparing food, which is contrary to beliefs and what we're set out to do. So there's a combination of factors in terms of would you lose weight? In general terms, you should. But as Nazim says, it depends on the level of activities you take on.
This may have been discussed in the presentation. Apologies if I've missed it, but when we talk about fasting, we're only referring to food. So in terms of fluid intake, that's still fine during daylight hours?
Yeah, so anything entering the alimentary canal, top end or tail end. So for example, taking even a tablet, if you're into taking suppositories, all these things would invalidate the fast.
Okay, thank you.
So that's an interesting point you made about making adjustments at work. Now, I did a presentation for NHS Scotland back in 2013 when I was a senior registrar, and I had highlighted things such as, for example, slight changes in working hours. So what you find is that these things are there, they are documented. How proactive management are and line managers are in particular, that's a separate issue altogether. And I think that's the main challenge within the NHS, is not so much the fact that the information isn't there, it's actually being proactive and actually looking at the calendar, being aware of the dates, being aware of your the makeup or the demographics of your workforce. In the same way, for example, we know, for example, when it comes to disability, gender, ethnicity, and things, so that it means that people can be proactive. I know, for example, there's one junior colleague in the Queen Elizabeth who's like got an agreement with the ward where he can start work at 10 but finishes at 6 because of that kind of sleep aspect of things, and it's been mutually agreed. So yes, he does miss the start of the ward round, but the benefit is at the evening time, when it comes to handing over to colleagues, he's able to finish off some of the day jobs and he knows the patient. So there's give and take.
Yeah.
And I think as well for more senior clinicians like myself, we're just quite pragmatic and practical in terms of how we use our annual leave and our planning our sessions. Now, for example, I have a colleague down in England. She's a surgical registrar and she's fasting. So she was asking me, what should I do? I've got a major operation, which she's performing, that is. Should I fast or not? And the general principle is one would start fasting, and if the fast is becoming overwhelming, it's going to compromise their ability to perform competently and safely, to break the fast. Not difficult. And if this becomes a recurring theme or it becomes evident that's there, then one could actually abstain from fasting from the get-go, because they've got this experience, as I mentioned before, of knowing that fasting can actually make things more challenging. So Islam's a very practical and dynamic faith when it comes to these things. And we've written a number of papers on different medical conditions now. For example, we've got diabetes. I've done one on driving. There's a paper being accepted by Heart for cardiovascular disease. There's clinical endocrinology for adrenal disease. We've got the BIMA guidance, which we talked about, for other conditions. There's a paper being accepted by the European Renal Association for chronic kidney disease and dialysis patients. There's a paper that's been under review that's been accepted by clinical medicine for organ transplant patients. So at least there's a good 6 or 8 papers there which highlight how we can guide clinicians and physicians and healthcare practitioners in terms of how we approach patients and support them. And even if it means not fasting, that's fine. Even just demonstrating why it's not safe for them and stuff, that's also important as well. It's not, by and large, it's about engaging, as per the thing I showed from the other paper. If you can remove barriers and increase communication, then actually we can benefit all parties concerned.
Absolutely. Kate, you've got your hand up now.
Hi, yeah, a wonderful talk, really interesting. I'm a dietitian, so I'm particularly interested in sort of diabetes, and I just wondered how you would recommend adjusting medication or adjusting insulin at the start of Ramadan.
So if you're able to access the GGC intranet, you can get access to the GGC guidance, which I've written, which goes through things, which has information on diet. There are the IDF, International Diabetic Federation, DAR, Diabetes Ramadan and Ramadan Alliance guidance, IDF DAR Ramadan guidance, which is very comprehensive and what we often will refer to, which has a lot of comprehensive information on diet and diabetes and things. And that's, I mean, that's a good 150 pages, evidence-based, wherever possible, has all the necessary areas covered. But the GGC guidance is a good starting point because I'm the author of that. I haven't updated it this year. DAR have updated their guidance. I had a bit of an issue with some of the guidance they've given. I've actually written a commentary which has been accepted, which perhaps discusses some of the limitations of the new guidance around risk scoring. But by and large, the rest of it's very good. So I would signpost you to that guidance first and foremost. It's available via the GGC intranet. If you're not unable to acquire that, then maybe emailing your colleagues in GGC, they should be able to send you a copy of it, or you can email me myself.
Lovely, thank you.
Another hand up, David?
Yeah, David.
Yeah, thanks, Nazim. That was really interesting, and I'll just sort of also sort of reiterate, I think, what Rob was saying earlier. It was just a very informative discussion. I'm non-clinical. I don't come to this with any sort of thoughts on that side of things, but I did find it quite interesting. You know, obviously all the rules and you know the diet side of things. I came along basically because, yeah, probably like a lot of people, I don't really know everything that goes on, and I just wanted to be wiser. Maybe not for this year, but maybe for next year now, and you know, take it forward. So I thank you very much. I thought it was really good, and best of luck with your ongoing research, etc. So take care. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Any other questions? You can also populate the chat box if you wish to do so.
I think there's something, is there
Well, it's not really a question for me, but it's more just a statement of intent. So as part of our equality outcomes for the next 4 years, Bryn and I are going to be implementing a new reasonable adjustment or health passport. So all of the information that you've provided today, and in terms of reasonable adjustments associated with staff members, I think that's something we'll certainly be including within that, and ensuring that anyone participating within the month of Ramadan, subject to their roles and duties, but reasonable adjustments are considered, flexible working patterns, etc. So yeah, it's been really useful for me to attend today.
Okay, if there's no further questions, then it might be useful just to wrap up, just on time. Just like to thank Nazim for presenting a very detailed session, and to all of you for asking some really interesting questions and having that informal conversation this afternoon. If you'd like to know more about the network, then Robin and Brinley, they represent the organisation in setting up a suite of networks for the Golden Jubilee, and tasked with the annual task of implementing the strategy for the organisation. So, or if you want to know more about the Multicultural Network, then please get in touch with myself, and I'm more than happy to respond to any questions. But thanks again for attending, and have a good afternoon.